What was your scariest something's not right moment? Back when I was about 17 and invincible, I got tired of waiting for the bus on my way home from school and started hitchhiking. A scruffy-looking guy in a beat-up pickup truck pulled over and I got in. He wouldn't look directly at me, but had a kind of creepy smile on his face. I told him I needed to go straight down the street about 12 blocks, but about 6 blocks later, he gets into a turn lane and puts on his turn signal. I finally realized something was up and my radar was going off like crazy. I saw some random guy on the street waiting at the crosswalk, so I started waving at him like crazy. Then I said, "Oh man, I'm in trouble now. That's my brother and he's going to be asking me who I was with in the truck." The random guy was looking at us strangely, probably trying to figure out who I was and why I was waving at him. The creepy guy's smile leaves his face and he turns off the turn signal. He drove straight down the street and I had him drop me off 3 blocks away from my home. I have no idea why it occurred to me to start waving at the guy, but I really think it saved me from some big trouble. Don't get into strangers' vehicles, folks. Please, I know you might be thinking, but in my small town, it's a lot safer. Yeah, maybe, but safer doesn't mean safe. I was sitting on the bench alone and noticed that a man walking along the water was staring at me. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe he had friends or family somewhere behind and wasn't actually looking at me. He started walking up from the water and walked right up to me, but didn't stop and circled around me. I felt awkward, so I didn't make eye contact. He walked away. I'm thinking at the time, maybe it was in my head. About an hour later, he came back and did the same thing. Went down to the water, looked at me, then started walking up to me. He came right up to me again, and as he starts to circle me, I look at him and notice he's staring not only at me, but also at all of my things, like he was taking inventory of what I had with me. I finally said, "Can I help you?" And he seems surprised that I spoke up and says, "Oh, no," and walks away. After he walked away, I couldn't shake the uneasy gut feeling. They say when you know something is wrong, not to ignore your gut feeling, and I can't explain it, but I knew. I was too scared to walk back to my car alone, so I ended up walking over to another man nearby who had been keeping to himself and told him what had happened and that I just wanted someone to walk back to the parking lot with so I wouldn't have to walk back alone. He confirmed that the man was in fact totally watching me the entire time I was there. He noticed and said he saw him creeping around a couple of other girls as well. That beach is ruined for me. As I walked back with the kind stranger, I still felt like I was being watched and I was paranoid my entire drive home. I'm so thankful for that kind stranger. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and if you feel like you're in danger, don't ignore that feeling. I've related this story before, but here goes. On a dark January night, I was driving a semi hauling 2 20-foot trailers south on US 93 in Arizona, USA. This was another infamous highway in the U.S. known as Head-On Highway. It was under construction, turning it from a 2-lane to a 4-lane divided highway. The speed limit was 55 miles per hour. Looking ahead, I saw the headlights of oncoming traffic coming down a hill with a right-hand curve at the bottom. In a flash, I realized something isn't right with the lead vehicle. In the next instance, it is clear they are on my side of the highway, and then damn, they are on my shoulder going north. My knee-jerk reaction is to steer left and avoid them. There's a double yellow line separating the north and southbound lanes. As I get close to the yellow line, I swear I hear my father's voice ring in my ear, "You do not drive in their lane. Do not drive in their lane." The thing is, my father was a union freight hauler with 2.5 million accident-free miles when he retired. Plus, he had passed away 11 years before this happened. By then, I was off the throttle and feathering my brakes with my left foot, so I hugged those yellow lines on my side of the highway. The other driver saw he was headed for some big yellow crash barrels lined up at the end of a guardrail and swerved to get back on his side of the highway. When he did this, I was down to about 35 miles per hour with him somewhere around 65 according to the accident investigator, and he hit us in the driver's side steer tire. He knocked it off the axle and tore the fuel filter off the engine. We rolled a short distance and the hood popped open when we stopped, which let me see that the engine was on fire. I yelled at my co-driver, who had slept through the whole accident by the way, that we were on fire and had to get out. He flew out of the sleeper berth with his cowboy hat and clothes in hand. I jumped out of the cab and grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprayed it under the cab. I could see that the crossover fuel line had been displacing and diesel was flowing onto the spreading fire. I threw the extinguisher away, reached into the cab and grabbed my coat, our logbooks, and the bill of lading. We were hauling a placarded load with flammable materials. Meanwhile, the other vehicle had come to a stop some 100 feet or so past us. When DPS, Arizona Department of Public Safety, arrived, they found a case of beer bottles on the floor of their back seat with half of them empty and shut the scene down as crime scene, drunk driving. It took fire and rescue an hour to cut the roof off and extract the driver who had suffered a broken leg. His brother was in the jump seat and had a broken arm. Our tractor and front trailer burned to the ground. I will never forget the sound of the tires on our tractor exploding due to the fire. 110 psi makes a hell of a racket when it goes off. A couple of months later, I received a letter of commendation from DPS with the accident investigator telling me the two brothers probably owed their lives to the way I handled the accident. It all happened in a flash, but I still get emotional about it 16 years later. Wow, good on you for keeping your cool and getting through that as well as you did. That driver was damned lucky he didn't kill someone doing something like that. Folks, never, ever drink and drive. Period. I've got two of them. Both shook me up. I worked as a bouncer in BFE, Missouri, and about midnight one night, I got sent to Walmart for something. Driving down 50, I caught a glimpse of a figure on the side of the road, a ghostly corner of your eye kind of thing. I pulled over and a young woman approached my passenger door. She was hyperventilating almost and really freaked out. I couldn't understand her, so I just told her to get in my truck. As we sat there for a moment, she tried to talk. Just then, a van pulled up behind me, still on the side of Highway 50, and a man jumped out and approached the passenger side window that was still down. He grabbed the girl and started cussing me. About a half a second goes by before I collect myself and in my biggest voice calmly explain he needs to back off and she's not leaving my truck. I told him I have no idea what's going on, but I'm taking her wherever she wants to go. We talked on the way to the hospital. She was from out of state. Some guys she met through a friend assaulted her and drug her out to a field. She was beaten until she played dead. She escaped from the back of the van when they stopped for gas. I don't usually stop for strangers at midnight, but something in my gut made me slam on my brakes for that woman. Another Missouri story, still bouncing, I used to drive girls for private shows. One girl decided to schedule her own show and make some money without having to tip me, I guess. Guys wouldn't give her the address for the party, just told me to meet them at a closed gas station off of 50. On the way there, she got nervous and called me. I was in bed half asleep, but after hearing her, I tried to talk her into just turning around. She insisted on meeting the guys because she needed the money. I made some comment about if I don't go with her, it'll be my fault when she's missing and on the news. So I met her at the empty gas station. The whole scene made me nervous, especially because they weren't expecting me. And buttholes get stupid when spooked. We sat for 10 minutes while we waited. The whole time, I tried to convince her to go home. 3 vehicles rolled up with several guys in them. They were all drunk/effed up. She jumped out of the car to be friendly, but the moment I stepped out and they saw me, they started cussing and hollering and rolling out in a hurry. I'm not the toughest idiot. I just don't think they expected a witness. Avoid Highway 50. Not me, but my father-in-law. He woke up one morning and asked my mother-in-law to find their kids as he had a bad dream and felt something was very, very wrong. Mom-in-law got a hold of my wife and one of her brothers, but could not reach the oldest. Unfortunately, it turns out that he had been murdered and dismembered the night my wife's father had that dream/bad feeling. It was due to drugs and gangs. He was tortured before he was killed. The perps responsible have been caught and are serving life sentences, so some justice was served, but not enough. That is heartbreaking to hear, but also, this is the kind of stuff I hear about that makes me question my skepticism a bit. There's so many stories of people waking up from dreams or just having a bad feeling, and stuff like this happening really makes you question stuff. I remember for several weeks I felt something was off, but I could never pinpoint what it was. I felt as if someone was following my every move. At the coffee shop I worked at, I had frequent regular customers, but no one stood out. He would ask for my number over and over again, give me large tips, and hang around longer than he had to. Every time I rejected him, he would become more persistent. I told him I was lesbian, which was true, but even that didn't deter him. He would say things like, "You haven't been with the right man," and "Pretty girls like you doesn't know what you're missing out on." I was creeped out, but I ignored it. On the bus ride home, as soon as I got off, I noticed someone behind me was following the same path I was, shortcuts and everything. When I fast walked, they fast walked. When I ran, they ran. It wasn't until they were out of sight I went into the direction of my apartment. The next day, I asked my boss if I could see the security footage from last night when I left. To my horror, that very same guy had been waiting around the corner of the store and only moved when I left to go to my bus stop. The further we looked at past the footage, the more sick I felt. The same guy had been waiting outside at night every night for the past 3 weeks. The day I waited for him to come in a while, my boss called the police. As soon as he came in, the cops questioned him. He wasn't nervous at all. He was convinced that we were in serious relationship and had memorized my work schedule, bus schedule, and even what stops I frequently used, so he always knew where I was. As it turned out, my gut feeling of something being horribly wrong was more accurate than I imagined. I found out later he had done this to other women before. One of them, he broke into her house. It scared the hell out of me knowing how far he was willing to go for a relationship. This is just a note to guys who get offended or are confused when women are hesitant to trust them or are nervous around them, even if you are a genuinely nice guy. It's because the number of guys like this in the world doing this crap to women. I know it isn't you, but try to understand why women might be a little nervous, okay? I know it isn't fair, but this crap is legit scary. I took the train, RER, then the bus to work every morning. Bus strikes were common at the time, and when I got to the bus stop and saw a ton of people, I asked around if there was a strike. I ended up having typical small talk with the guy I asked about the bus. It eventually came, I went to work. On my way home, I get back on the train, and what a coincidence, that same guy gets on the train back into the city. We said the standard, "Fancy seeing you, have a nice day." And I put on my headphones to politely ignore the small talk / light hitting on me he wants to start, and that's so super common. Once we got closer to my stop, he started asking me, "What's at this / your stop?" I lived at St. Michael in Paris, so Notre Dame is the big one, plus Musée de Cluny. It's the type of question that lets you know someone isn't familiar with that neighborhood / isn't their stop. I go to get off at my stop, and he gets off the train too. My hackles went up immediately. I lived super close to the metro entrance, and I just knew he was following me. I did some crazy maneuvers, went around the neighborhood, put up / took down my umbrella to change my look. It really freaked me out. The thing is, getting catcalled and followed happened all the time, but something just hit me differently. The next morning, I go down to the metro stairs to my stop at about 5 a.m. and hear, "Mademoiselle, mademoiselle!" I look up, and it's him. From that day on, I took a different route to / from work each day. I also asked my coworkers to drive me to different RER stops instead of taking the bus. I had just parked my car at work and had gotten out and was walking around to my trunk when I noticed a jogger in the parking lot I didn't recognize. Before and after work, we see quite a few people jogging / walking from the other businesses in the office park, so it's not an unusual sight. But this guy made me feel like I shouldn't turn my back to him for some reason. He wasn't acting off or anything to make me feel that way at all. So I'm now digging through my trunk, and my lunch has rolled to the back, and my little stubby arms can't reach it from standing, and I know I'll have to lean way into my trunk to get it. I start to lean, and I'm still watching the jogger out of the corner of my eye, and I see him stop jogging and start sneaking along the line of cars leading to mine. In hindsight, I should have slammed my trunk shut and sprinted for the front door. What I did was square up and face the direction he was coming from and yell, "Good morning, can I help you?" when he slunk around the SUV next to my car. He was surprised and turned and hauled butt away. A second later, one of the managers came barreling out the front door toward me, yelling for me to get inside. There's a predator in the parking lot. We never saw the dude again, but I made sure everyone was on the lookout for him. I know better than to play on my phone in parking lots. Who knows what would have happened if I'd been distracted? Would the manager have made it outside in time? I think about it from time to time, even though it's been like 6 years or so. Our work parking lot is very safe. I've never even heard of someone having stuff stolen out of their unlocked cars. It took a long time for it to feel safe again. When I was about 19, I was waiting for my then boyfriend to get off of work at the mall, standing outside near the employee entrance. It was close to 10 p.m. and the mall had already closed, so the parking lot was fairly empty. This car drove up to the curb, probably 15 feet from where I was standing at the wall, and the window rolled down. The driver was the only person in the car, and he asked if I knew how to get to X road. That road was the one visible from where I was standing, so I pointed at it and told him the exit onto that road was right across the way. He kept looking at me and said, "I'm having trouble hearing you," so I walked 5 feet closer and shouted it at him. He said, "Could you show me? I'm terrible with directions." I immediately decided this man just wanted me to either get close enough to grab or to get into his car, and just pointed to the road and said, "Drive that way, you can't miss it," and walked right into the employee entrance to wait for my boyfriend instead. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but figured getting yelled at by security was way better than getting kidnapped by a guy in his 40s. This kind of stuff both scares and infuriates me. People like this just preying on the kindness of others. It makes you genuinely not want to be nice to people because of what they might do. These people not only do awful things, but their existence actively makes other people less good just for self-preservation. I video called my sister an hour after she had a baby. She picked up and just said, "I don't feel good, but something was bone-chillingly off about it." An hour later, she was hemorrhaging and all of her stats were in a free fall. Turns out she had a major complication that the doctors missed. The scariest time of my life. She spent 3 weeks in ICU, but eventually made a full recovery, and the baby was healthy and is currently climbing on me as we enjoy Christmas together. That was 2 years ago, but I still remember the exact look in her eye when she said, "I don't feel good." Gives me chills every day. I was just a kid when one time my grandfather decided to take my cousin and me on a trip to the gas station to pick up diesel for the tractor. We lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so there wasn't much else to do. We rode 3 deep in his single cab S10. I rode in the middle seat and my cousin in the passenger. My cousin and I are both 12 to 13 at the time and had long hair for boys in this town. When we get to the gas station, my grandfather parks at a pump and heads inside, leaving the keys in the truck with us buckled inside. Considering we live in a small town with next to nobody in it where nothing happens, this wasn't unusual. All was normal until that point. Just before my grandfather had walked in, an elderly man of a similar age sitting on the bench outside of the station stopped him and pointed at us. I couldn't hear what they said, but I got a weird feeling about it suddenly. My grandfather walked inside after the short interaction and walked up to the register. The man doesn't take his eyes off us from across the parking lot. He suddenly gets up and just starts walking right towards us. I start panicking and my cousin does too. As soon as he reached the truck, he opened the driver's side door. My cousin unbuckles and tells me to get out as he hops out. I start mashing my buckle release, but it's stuck and the seatbelt is locked firmly against me from my panicking. My cousin leans back in and tries to push the release, but realizes it's stuck too and then immediately hops out. The guy just looks at me and grins as he reaches for the keys in the ignition. I still, to this day, remember looking at that evil smile and watching his fingers touch the key. It still gives me effing chills, and I remember just thinking that I was done. The next thing I notice, my cousin is leaning back in with a hammer he grabbed out of the bed of the truck, screaming that he's about to hit him. The old man immediately throws his hands up and says he's just joking and climbs out. He walks behind the station just as my grandfather comes out and none the wiser. When my grandfather gets back in, we both try to explain what just happened to him, but we aren't making any sense at all to him. I honestly just think it was the fact that we were in shock and he was so old and unsuspecting of that kind of thing in our area. As soon as we got home, we told the rest of the family about it. They immediately start questioning my granddad about what the man said to them. He tells him the man just asked if we were his granddaughters, but he didn't pay much attention to him because the man seemed deaf. This old creep thought we were 2 little girls and planned on abducting us. If my cousin hadn't been so fast on his feet, I'm not sure I would be here to tell this story. This crap scarred me for life. I remember it all so well. I was completely terrified and cried the whole way home as my cousin held me. This guy just looked at me and smiled like he was enjoying my sheer terror. It was nothing short of pure effing evil. I still dream about it from time, to be honest. As soon as my grandfather put it all together, he got all the men in my family to grab their guns and immediately drove back to the gas station. They called the police and we searched the area for him for about an hour before the police showed. He was never caught. I hope to God that he's rotting in a ditch somewhere. I probably shouldn't feel this way, but part of me wishes my cousin had beat him to death with the hammer. I would have got more sleep over these past 10 years since it happened. That is absolutely terrifying, and I'm so glad to hear your cousin came back to help you like that. Once again, folks, I know small towns feel safe like that. And that is part of what gives monsters like this the courage to try what they do. I work graveyard shifts in a high-care home right now next to a men's shelter, long-term stay individual units. Most of the time we get along well. Some nights the men next door get rowdy and come over to the home knocking on doors. Normally we can redirect them back to their house with nil issues. Now, we have sensor lights at every doorway at the house overnight. Just for safety, normally it's the same guy who forgets where he lives. I got to work. There was a sensor light flickering directly over the footpath and garden. I thought nothing of it and started to get ready to exit my locked car to head inside. I had this overwhelming pit in my stomach that made me stay seated. The light blew, and it was completely dark. I started my car and flicked on my high beams just in time to see a man hiding in the garden I would have walked past to go into the house, and the kicker, seeing something heavy-looking in his hand as he was trying to get away. I called my coworker, a young blonde woman in the house, to tell her which way he was going and to check all the doors and not to open up until the police told her to. It turns out he was known to the police due to S offenses. Also had been watching us at the house for a while as there were fingerprints on the outside of the windows and footprints in the garden beds. The thing that keeps me awake, when the police informed me his choice of victims were 5'5" brunettes in their mid to late 20s. I'm the only one who fits that type on the team. I was about 16 to 17, driving back to my place from 7-Eleven in my mom's car with a friend. The streets were deserted as it was the middle of the night around 2 a.m. As we pulled up to the stoplight and a motorcycle with a pillion on the back pulled up unnecessarily close to our car's passenger side window. I had a bad feeling but ultimately did nothing and proceeded to chat with my friend while waiting for the green light. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the pillion pulling a rod or hammer from his backpack and starts to wind up. I peel the F out of there real fast, LMAO. Managed to lose the bike and got home safe. Friend didn't even know what was going on until we reached my place. I woke up an hour and a half before my alarm and couldn't go back to sleep, so I got up to make my partner's lunch. I got up and the front door was open and the living room light was on. My mom was staying with me and had her dog, so I assumed she took her outside, but the air around me felt really weird, so I started making the lunch and realized she hadn't come in. I opened the door to look outside and she's at the bottom of my porch steps, lying in a pool of blood. I thought she had gotten shot. It turns out she tripped up walking down my stairs and cracked her head open. Spent a week in the hospital with a brain injury. She's okay now. The doctors actually had found a spot in her leg where her cancer had spread and found it earlier than they would have if she hadn't fallen. Thank heavens you woke up early and found her when you did, or who knows what would have happened. And then finding the cancer early? Those are two extremely lucky coincidences for what could have been such a tragic story. I was at the local mall a few years ago. I was there with a friend. She went into the bathroom and I was waiting alone outside the bathroom. It was near closing hour, so it wasn't surprising that some guard told me that it was almost time to leave. But before I could respond to it, I took one good look at him and my stomach turned. It was not a guard, but he acted like he was. He then offered to escort me out of the building. People walked past and I noticed his badge was plastic and from some toy store. I just told him no and kept on waiting for my friend. Every time I looked at him, my stomach turned and I got shivers. When my friend got out of the bathroom, he was gone. She asked me who I was talking to, and after I told her, we got out of there quick. A week after, I was there again to get some stuff and asked an actual security guard about the guy from earlier. They had to escort him out several times because he kept posing as a guard to get teenagers to come into his car. I haven't seen the guy since, and it still gives me the creeps when I see that bathroom door. Waiting there felt like years. Who knows what actually could have happened if I listened to him? I also wonder if anyone ever actually followed him. I hope not. I was home from college visiting my parents' house for the weekend. My sister had taken my old bedroom and I was sleeping in the guest room next to it. I was on my way out and had absolutely no reason to go into her room, but something made me peek in there last minute. My sister's old-school portable space heater was left on and had tipped over, laying on top of a cardboard box. I was the last one to leave the house that day. My whole house could have burned down with all our pets in it if I hadn't gone into her room. Another fire situation that almost happened. I was back at school and was going to just crash at my boyfriend's apartment one night. I couldn't shake this weird feeling of needing to go home. Even though it was late and cold out, I trekked back to my place. When I got inside, all my roommates were already sleeping, but I noticed the stove light letting you know the burners were warm was on. I went to go check it out and realized my roommate accidentally left the stovetop burner on low and there was a kitchen towel left on top of it. Shake my head. Fire safety is no joke. All it takes is just a little bit of carelessness to accidentally start a fire. I've known a few folks who lost homes to fires, so I tend to be pretty paranoid about checking those kinds of things, and I still slip up from time to time. Summer before graduating high school, I was home alone because my family went to go camping and I had to work. I decided to mow the lawn as it was one of my chores and it needed to get done. Shortly after starting, I felt a sharp pain on my ankle and realized I'd been stung by a wasp/yellow jacket. I'd been stung before and never had problems, but I didn't want to mow over the entire nest. So I moved to the front of the house and called my dad and jokingly told him to clear them out when he got home. As soon as I got off the phone, I felt an itch on the palm of my hands and I started to feel dread. The itch escalated to ridiculous light sensitivity that I basically had my eyes squeezed shut and I began to panic. I started to make my way to my neighbor's house, but halfway there, I collapsed. I was breathing fine, but I felt like I had no energy. I was able to crawl to their door and ring the doorbell. They let me in, and right before blacking out, I apparently said, "There might be bees outside." I woke up to paramedics trying to get me to wake up. Once I did, they asked if I could walk. I was able to stand, but I blacked out again as soon as I took a step. Apparently, it was a combination of anaphylactic shock and dehydration. I'd never felt that way before. I assumed everyone just got itchy spots or their throats closed up, but I didn't have that at all. My blood pressure plummeted and my neighbor said I looked like a ghost. Lost blood in all my extremities or something. I was also told that 5 more minutes and I wouldn't have made it. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.